Tulsi Gabbard is someone who has met with war criminals, violated the Department of State's guidance, and secretly, clandestinely went to Syria and met with Assad, who gassed and attacked his own people with chemical weapons. She's considered to be essentially, by most assessments, a Russian asset, and would be the most.
Is that how you
dangerous...
consider her? Is that what you consider her?
Oh, yes. There's no question. I consider her someone who is likely a Russian asset, who would be as the DNI responsible for managing our entire intelligence community, hold all of our most significant intelligence information and secrets, and essentially would be a direct line to our enemies. And so the irresponsibility of these appointments.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I'm incredibly honored to have Sue Gordon on today. She spent over 25 years at the CIA and served as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence under Donald Trump. Sue, Debbie Wasserman Schultz just came right out and described Tulsi Gabbard as a Russian asset. That is coming from a very partisan place, understandably, given Representative Wasserman Schultz's position, but you had a unimpeachable, no pun intended, reputation for nonpartisanship throughout your career. You even served under former President-elect Trump. What is your assessment of the risk posed by appointing someone like Tulsi Gabbard to run our entire intelligence establishment?
Yeah, so what I like to say is the politics of this are settled, right? The American people, in a free and fair election, chose who they wanted to be president. But I understand where Debbie came from with the comments, and that is when you repeat what we know to be Russian propaganda, especially in a world where there's so much out there that says that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians are trying to shape our information environment. I get where you can say you are acting as a Russian agent, but let me not, I've never met her. And so I wouldn't be casual with, assigning a motivation. So let's just talk about Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence. I get it that it's an arcane position, that it's hard to understand. So let me see if I can share really briefly what the job is. The job is to be the president's principal advisor on intelligence. And what that means is, and this is really hard to do, you have to not care what they want to hear.
Wow.
And you have to tell them ruthlessly what you see, right? That's what you're doing. I'm not going to use the word truth. You're just saying, this is what is, not what I prefer. This is what I see. And we've developed sources, and this is how we know, and this is how we have confidence in it. And that's that principal advisor role. Loyalty that says, I know what he wants to do, is counterproductive in this role. I've had previous presidents say, Sue, you're depressing because you steal my decision space. And that's right. If we're telling you something that causes you to think differently about a decision, then we did our job. And so I think on that first one, a loyal pick, in particularly this job that is not a policy job, certainly intelligence supports policy making, but loyalty in this position can actually be the worst thing that a president needs, because this is going to be the only voice that is going to tell you things harshly. And it requires you to actually understand intelligence, because intelligence is weird. Like sometimes you can have intelligence that looks perfect and makes you want to say it's a slam dunk to invade Iraq, right? And other times it's really sketchy, but what you know about the corroboration and the sources say, no, I think that this one is actually indicative. So those two things, ruthless attention to what is, not what somebody wants, and understanding the nuance of intelligence, I think is really important in the DNI. So that's one. The second job is you are responsible for all information sharing agreements with allies and partners, and with the private sector. With our allies and partners, and allies and partners is actually, you know this, Ken, because you served. That is the great strength of America. We have friends. But they are making decisions when they choose to share their best information about whether we are going to protect their interest, not use it for ours, but can they trust us to protect their interests? And I think the past 10 to 15 years have not been kind on that, whether that's through unauthorized leaks or apparent agendas being offered. I think that our allies and partners are going to be looking to say, can we trust them? Are they the people that we want to throw our lots in with? I was actually really surprised that we were able to put together the coalition with Ukraine after the Afghanistan pullout, because I think that, on top of some other things, damaged our reputations. But I'll tell you, Ken, they're watching. And so now what they're watching is someone, by her own words, not my assessment, like I'm not making any assessment, by her words, has espoused views that we know are not true when it comes to Syria use of chemical weapons, that are not true when it comes to the situation on the ground in Ukraine. And so they're saying, well, what's the deal? Right? Is there an agenda at work? And so to me, that sharing relationship is really something that has to be monitored. The third thing is they're responsible for setting the intelligence community's budget, the whole of it. $80 billion, 18 agencies. The budget goes through the DNI. The choices you make are the ones that says, where do we need to go to have the information we need to provide decision makers with advantage? And brief digression, all this conversation about blowing up the bureaucracy and waste, I agree. I don't think there's anyone who's been in my position that doesn't say the government's too slow. We're carrying too much of our past with it. We're not making all the decisions we need to make in order to be able to move forward with alacrity, organized the way we need to. But you can't get there if you don't know what you're trying to achieve. In other words, the only way to cut things is to say, here's the vision I have for what we need. And who's going to set that? It's the DNI. Yeah. You can say, well, the president sets it. Really? The president isn't going to understand what needs to be done in order to achieve our objectives. So I think the problem with Colonel Gabbard is, I don't know how in any of those domains she's performant at a time that the world's on fire. Clarity is more necessary. Spying is harder. Advantage is more elusive. You need a pro's pro. So pick someone who can do those three jobs, and I think you're going to be in better stead.
I want to talk about her gross lack of qualifications across all three of these domains, especially the lack of confidence our allies will have in her. But I want to go back to something you said, describing this as not a policy job. Can you expound on that a little bit for this audience and drive home this point that intelligence should inform policy, whereas the Trump administration seems to have an idea of where it wants to go and is insisting on fact sets shaping themselves to that direction?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why I love intelligence, right? Because all you have to do is work harder to see more. And then there's just a wonderful craft that allows you to deal with what is fundamentally uncertain information and to present it in a manner that allows a decision maker to use it. That's all it is. It's why this suggestion that people in national security can only work for one president and all need to be removed is just silliness in this domain, because we do the same thing for every president. We did the same thing for former President Trump in his first administration. We took what he wanted to do and we tried to put in front of him the insight that allowed him to make better decisions. So that's all it is. It's that every single day. Now, the president does have policy decisions to make, as does the Secretary of State and others need to do. And so you want to be relevant to their policy, but you're not prescribing their policy. Right? Does that make sense? You're bringing to them unique information so that they can make their decision. And it is at the end of the day, their decision. We could go back to Khashoggi and the intelligence community, because that was a real tussle between us, where he didn't want to agree with our assessment. But here's the rub. He didn't have to agree with the decision. He could make whatever decision he wanted to do. You just can't make it based on faulty intelligence, because that makes for faulty decision making. And I mentioned when we first started Iraq WMD. So let's go back to that time and say, well, how does this happen badly? Let me give you an example of how it happens badly. 9/11 was the worst. It's certainly the worst day in America. But if you're in the intelligence community, there was no worse day. We failed. We failed at the one thing that we couldn't fail at, and we did. So we are I'll use the word heartbroken, because that's how strongly we feel about serving our country. And man, that's hard. And we didn't have enough. We knew the light was blinking red, but we couldn't tell you where it was. And so we come out of that as a community just absolutely committed to be better, right? And we're more. Jump forward to Iraq WMD, and it was a pick'em. If you remember, in those days, we didn't have the same foundation of intelligence understanding of Iraq that we did of the former Soviet Union, where we had spent all our assets for so many years understanding it. We're still new at understanding it, and we have light intelligence, and we're being asked, as always, to make a call. And if you read our reporting, you can say it's a pick'em of whether he has them or not. But when it comes down to we knew what the White House wanted to do. They wanted to avenge that loss. And at some point, we want to serve, and we didn't want to say, I don't know, right? And that is, in fact, what we didn't know. And we just leaned 51% into that call, in part because that was what was wanted to do. And we didn't serve well that day.
Yeah. Tulsi Gabbard seems to epitomize this idea that you shape the facts to the policy, whether it's promoting conspiracy theories like the Ukrainian biolabs or parroting Russian propaganda about Syrian chemical weapons. Do you think she actually believes this? You said you haven't met her, so it's tough to ask, but you've been in this business for 25 years. Does this strike you as someone who is trying to please the people who control her destiny, or is she a true believer in this kind of stuff?
So she was, during the time that she made most of these comments, she was a sitting member of Congress, right? I think she was on the Armed Services Committee. She was never on the Intel Committee, but she was on Armed Services Committee. I question the judgment of being so certain about information that was running counter to your national security community, and was advancing the interests of those who would do us harm. And I don't know what was in her head. I know she didn't have independent intelligence, right? There isn't. There was plenty out there. The intelligence community, one of the things is it is getting more and more transparent. It is figuring out how to reveal more of its information so the American people can understand the rationale behind the things we do. So I don't know how she came to the moment thinking that was a helpful thing to do, especially given that as a member of Congress, she certainly would have had the ability to call people in and have conversations about it. And to the point about being a Russian agent, I wouldn't make that claim against anybody, but you can be used even if you're not a conspirator. And this is more and more, even the intelligence community has to worry about that. We always have, but you have to worry more and more about what's being shaped and what are people believing because of it. So it feels casual at best and irresponsible at worst. And I don't know why it was in the nation's best interest. That it has become a useful statement, given what we know about President-elect Trump's policy intention going forward. I don't know that I link those two, but it does mean that she would have to make a pretty significant jump to say, yeah, I used to support your policy. Now I just support you by telling you all the things that we know so you can make better decisions. And that feels like a distance to travel.
I'm just trying to get a sense of her character, because this feels like one of those jobs in Washington that depends as much on character or more on character than just about any other job, because you cannot waver from the truth, even if it's incredibly unpopular. And, I've met Tulsi Gabbard. She was incredibly helpful back in the day when we were, building veterans organizations. She was an ally. She does not seem like an unintelligent person,
right?
Which is really disorienting when you hear her saying the things she's saying, and it makes me wonder if she actually knows what she's doing, which is even worse. Over the last decade, the U.S. has witnessed a steady growth in politically motivated, threatening online behavior, peaking around election cycles, with 3 in 4 voters reporting fearing political violence. I myself have had to take extra precautions to keep personal information private. The fact is, you can't always control whether you're a target, but you can make it harder for politically motivated threat actors to escalate threats by taking a proactive approach to the security of your personal information. As a person who exists publicly, especially as someone who shares his opinions online, I am hyper aware of safety and security, and it's easier than ever to find personal information about people online. All this data hanging out on the internet can have actual consequences in the real world. That's why I personally recommend Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data brokers. Delete Me sends regular personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. It's always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. To put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping your and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today you get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting KEN20 to 64000. Text KEN20 to 64000. That's KEN20 to 64000.
He's essentially pimping out our men and women in uniform to a foreign power who's the highest bidder, and saying very blatantly and very directly, well, hey, look, they're paying us for them. He is unfit to be our commander-in-chief. And what he is doing is dishonoring the service and the sacrifice that every single one of these service members is doing for our country, and the service and sacrifice that their loved ones and their family members go through.
She figured out which way the wind was blowing and has sailed that into a D&I nomination, and I find that even more terrifying than the sheer incompetence of some of the other nominees.
Yeah, she doesn't have the background born of working in jobs that would give it to you, right? That feels like she's ready to do this on day one. And then you couple that with, again, statements that don't make much sense given the other information that would have been available to the time. It also feels like she's making independent decisions. Listen, intelligence is never opinion. It's often wrong, but it is never opinion. It isn't here's what I think. It is a craft and a discipline putting that together. And I don't know that I see her having that experience. And then you couple it with the willingness to speak authoritatively when you know you don't have the basis for that authority. just seems difficult. And there are others that have more. And so it is a curious choice to me. I have children who are decorated combat veterans and accomplished prosecutors, and neither one of them are qualified for this job. Like I they said, "Hey, Ma, you were former President Trump's principal deputy. I just got a call. They asked me to take this job." I'm like, "And do you think you're up for it?" Right? So you don't even have to go down the path to say, we need leaders worthy of this moment in history, because it is a world where either the world order is in flux or it's already been reestablished and we're the only ones that don't have a position. We need to be able to handle assessment in entirely new areas. We need to be much better, not just in capabilities, but in use by our allies and partners. We need to be better in assessing technology. We need better in using technology. We need to be better in economic intelligence. We absolutely need to reduce our budgets in some areas so we can fund those things. How do you get there? And if you think a leader of an organization is a titular figurehead, you're not going to get the outcome that the nation needs. To me, this is just, you need people who are worthy of the American people in the job in the moment.
How do you think this affects intelligence sharing, which, as you pointed out, is our real strength? We have friends, but we are losing them with decisions like this.
Well, I think in general, in this digitally connected world where economics are driving more than military protection in terms of alliances and partnerships, and that is more situational in general, I think countries are more willing to protect their sovereign interests in their own way than to seek the cover of our protection. And so that means they're making a decision. Our allies and partners are making decisions every day about what's in their best interests. And if they don't think aligning with the interests that we espouse works for them, if they think that puts them in peril, if they think that takes away some of their sovereign flexibility, they won't decide. And remember, we were challenged in the first Trump administration with our allies and partners with some of the decisions on tariffs and restrictions that we had before. So they're watching and they get to decide.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com and make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show.
Now, hopefully, again, if you put professionals, and stop this word bureaucrats, it's just, that soundtrack is just so ridiculous because it doesn't represent who these women and men are. But one of the great roles of intelligence and the leaders of intelligence is to have conversations and relationships with our liaison services below the chop of policy. Man, if you can't trust that those things are being said below the chop are things that those countries can count on, you're not going to have one of the most important channels of global stability that you've had in the past. So these are real jobs. These aren't people taking government paychecks. These are people who put themselves at risk to do the nation's bidding. And you got to have, and that's true for our allies and partners too, because they're making it for their people.
Yeah.
Right? Our allies and partners serve with us when we serve. They go with us when we go. And because we have fewer and fewer troop deployments globally, we're relying on those who are close to the geographic locations where we need to have intel. So I think I'm with you, Ken. that of all the things that need to be protected, that's one of the most important roles, and you need someone who people are going to trust. And again, I'm not saying it based on the human. I'm saying it based on the statements that have been made. I'm not interpreting. I'm just.
How do you think the Senate handles this? I mean, this is outside your domain, but I can't think of an analog to this. I mean, Bork doesn't compare. This is new territory for our advise and consent tradition.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think this is really going to put the Senate to the test, because no one wants to say no to the president's nominees. They don't. He won the presidency. You want to let him have his team. On the other hand, it's a real job to do the advice and consent. And every once in a while, let's choose 10 people. You might have one in the past that the Senate would say no way. And that's where you get kind of this horse trading thing. Maybe he's throwing up Gates in order to get somebody else. You have so many that just the gentlemanly behavior is going to be hard. I would tell my Senate friends, and I know you guys, like I worked with you for years, you put me through my paces. Ron Wyden was not happy about the things that had been done in intel collection, and he made it clear during my confirmation hearing. I mean, this is the way it goes. So what I would hope is that the Senate will do their job because it's prescribed by the Constitution. Do it honestly, do it reasonably, do it respectfully. And I will hope that if that happens, we'll come out with a slate of leaders that are worthy of this moment. But it's hard because so many of the ones that he's nominated have these kind of challenges.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope the Senate lives up to its
I think it's going to be hard for him.
Constitutional obligations, its moral obligations, but the Senate has changed in the last 8 years. I guess we will see if it is indeed a check and balance or a rubber stamp.
Yeah. I don't know. What I hope, when we have conversations like this, and I think one of the things that so worries me is these are important, serious times. And they do require people of craft and skill. And it has not been my experience that I have served with many, if any, bums. The idea of both bringing in people that don't know as much and simultaneously suggesting that you're going to clean out the people that do, for the American people, I would say this is not going to serve you well. We have been graced with this wonderful geography that gives us abundance and distance that has given us peace. And I look at the future, that is not a guarantee. And I want people around that are going to be able to see it for what it is in those moments that are going to become hard, because the moments will become hard. They always do.
Well, thank you, Sue, for your invaluable voice in this area. We'd love to check in with you again. I hope the circumstances are better next time.
Yeah, you and I have only one side, and that's America. So let's go for it.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.